So part of the reason why we decided to do this event was doing some ecosystem analysis around deep tech, and we were very impressed with what HelloTomorrow has been doing globally, in Europe specifically. So wanted to invite our next illustrious speakers to present on their experience. We have Arnaud de la Tour, who's the co-founder and CEO of HelloTomorrow, and Massimo Portincaso, who is the chairman of HelloTomorrow. And with that, I'll allow both of you to further introduce yourselves, and we'll go from there. Thanks so much to both of you for being here.
Wonderful. So I will get started. I'm, as mentioned, Massimo Portincaso. I'm the chairman, and I will give you a broader introduction while Arnaud will give more specific insight on certain aspect of it. Arnaud, do you want to say something about you before I get started?
Yeah, well, thank you very much for the invitation already, and it's an honor to speak after Steve Blank. So we are really happy to be here. Yes, I'm one of the founder and CEO of HelloTomorrow, and so we've been working a lot and developing a large community on deep tech. Just maybe a few words about HelloTomorrow, and then I will let you go into the topic, Massimo. So we are both a worldwide community of startup investors, corporates, and also a bit institutions. And leveraging this community, we provide services to government and private companies. And we might mention a few of the events or actions that we do later in the discussion.
Let me start giving you a bit of an introduction about deep tech. And there's been a lot of talking in the previous presentation. There was this kind of definition of what is deep tech, and we keep on hearing a lot, and we keep on hearing also a lot of, is this technology a deep technology or not? And what we really love to say is that actually deep tech is more an approach toward innovation than it is about a specific technology. And I think when it comes to deep tech, it's always interesting to start with a bit of a broader context, which is very much aligned with many of the things that Steve Blank used to talk about and some of the talks that he has been giving. But the way we like to see it is that basically deep tech is coming as what we call the fourth wave of innovation. And if you look at it in perspective, there was a first wave of innovation, which was the one that happened with the first and the second industrial revolution. And this is really the wave of innovation that laid the foundation for our civilization. It was very much focused on atoms. This is the wave of innovation that gave us the internal combustion engine, is the one that gave us a lot of the chemistry that we know today. It's the one that gave us the electricity, radio. It's really what many of these processes, like the Haber-Bosch and the Bessemer for steel, are still in use today. So this was the first wave. Then, as mentioned also by Steve, there was a strong wave of innovation happening after the Second World War. And this was the wave of innovation that was very strongly driven by the state, but also by the big corporate labs. So it was the time of the Bell labs, it was the time of the big IBM, of the Spark, but also the NASA mission. And this is really when we had a lot of innovation happening. This is the wave that brought us literally to the moon, but it's also the wave that gave us the computer, the personal computer, or the first instance of what was the personal computer. This wave kind of died, and each of these waves is building on the previous one. So it's not that one stops and the other one starts, but they are all rebuilding one on top of the other. And this second wave almost stopped to exist at the end of the 70s, early 70s, when a new wave of innovation started happening. It was a wave of external innovation. It's when, because of some regulatory changes, the venture capital started raising significantly with Sequoia, also the Kleiner Perkins. They were already there. It's not that they started here. They were already there, and they initiated Silicon Valley. But now they're really starting to become a mainstream driver of innovation, and this is the wave that started us giving us Apple and Microsoft, but it's also the one that gave us after Google, Airbnb, but also Genentech. And what was really interesting is that these waves focus very strongly on on the ICT side of things and on the biotech side of things, with very clear characteristic in terms of market risk, high market risk, low technology risk for the ICT side, or high technology risk, low market risk for the biopharma side. And this wave is the wave that gave us the digital transformation. It took 40 years, started at the end of the 80s, is now still ongoing. And it focused really on the bits. So you had the first one with the atoms, you have the third one with the bits focus and all the digital transformation. And the wave that is happening now is really a different wave from the previous one because the innovation focus is really on the atoms, but is powered by the bits. It's a very different approach to innovation. It's a different approach in terms of infrastructure and what is made possible by different startups. So we're going to see it, and Arnaud is going to talk about it, but what is possible in these ways is fundamental innovation. I wouldn't say as a default, but the access to fundamental innovation is much, much, much bigger. So if this is the overall framework of reference for this fourth wave of innovation about which we're going to talk about today, what are the characteristics of the ventures that are present and represent the core of this wave of innovation? And I think what we're seeing are basically four core characteristics that characterize these kind of ventures. The first one is, as I said, it's about atoms and bits. So there is a focus on physical product, not only, but mostly physical product. Of course, there are also some software product, but it's mostly physical product. This is really important. They are part of a bigger deep tech interconnected ecosystem. It really, the level of complexity for what you need to do has grown to a level where it's impossible for two people in a garage to come up over a week or two with a new great product, or a couple of coders out of their dorm coming up with a new product, working through the weekend. The complexity of what is at stake is too big to be able to do that alone. So it's really important to think all of these in terms of ecosystem. The other very important characteristic is that many of these ventures are coming at it with fundamental issues, and they're addressing problem. So many are starting with the technology in focus, but the successful ones are really the ones that are able to shift from a technology angle, the famous hammer looking for the nails, into a problem, and how can we solve the problem. And this is particularly important because one of the key characteristics that we're seeing is that many of these ventures are playing at the intersection of different technologies. So we're seeing that most of them are using more than one technology, and really because they want to solve this fundamental issue, they want to address a problem, they're bringing together different technologies. We're going to see not only that, to be able to solve the problem. So what does it mean at the meta level in terms of deep tech, and how does this approach to innovation looks like? Arnaud is going to talk us about. So Arnaud?
Indeed, we wanted to draw the conclusions on all the observations of all the startups bringing breakthrough innovations to the market, deep tech innovation, on what really are the important dimensions of this deep tech wave. Because we started to communicate about deep tech in 2016, kind of to show that there was a new kind of startups maybe taking more time to reach the market, with more capital requirements to build the first prototypes. And then I think the story about deep tech has been crystallized a little bit too much around those few dimensions. We wanted here to give a little bit of theory about why we think deep tech is really a new innovation wave. And if we start from what we can consider that is today's option space, so without all those emerging technologies and the deep tech approach in general, this is this kind of small sphere. But then really the first thing to understand is that deep tech is broadening the option space. And this is driven by two forces, by the convergence of both the technologies. So, of course, deep tech is enabled by breakthrough technologies, whether it is in computation, like AI, or maybe soon quantum computing, in matter and energy, or the biotech and material science advances, and also senses and motions. And what is more important also is their convergence. And for example, if you think about synthetic biology, this is really the convergence of biotech, of robotics, of AI to analyze the huge amount of data. So this convergence is really important. But it's not only about the convergence of technologies, it's also the convergence of approaches. So startups that are able to combine in small teams really the breakthrough science, sometimes being linked still to research labs, but also engineers that will make sure this breakthrough science actually is scalable and can be industrialized into products that are cheap enough to reach the markets. But also the design part, the design aspect. And this is also a quite important, I think, aspect of deep tech, because we think a lot about the technology, but what is really different, what is really new is that what was traditional R&D is now also really merged with this design thinking aspect, coming more from the lean startup world and from digital startups. So the important thing to not to be lost in this huge opportunity space is really to focus on a problem. So that's what you say, Massimo. We see many entrepreneurs applying to the HelloTomorrow challenge, the competition that we organize, that indeed have a huge potential, but that are too much in love with their solution, with their technology, and they just want to bring their technology to the markets. And what we see is that successful entrepreneurs, they very quickly focus on a clear problem, which becomes their northern star. The other important aspect is the engine, we can say, to bring the idea into a prototype and then into a product on the market. That's the design, build, test, learn cycle. And we can do the parallel with the lean startup methodology developed by Steve Blank, because in the end, that's kind of the lean startup, but brought to a more complex product and really breakthrough R&D. And what is new is that the design parts, with all the computation and all the model that we can do, allow us to really go from discovery to design. So, for example, in biotech, many startups in healthcare or other sectors, instead of screening literally thousands or millions of molecules to see if they have a potential aspect, a potential interesting feature, then we are able now to start from actually what we want those new molecules to do, and then design what should be the shape then of this molecule. And then, for example, you know that AlphaFold from Google Mind managed to model the protein folding very efficiently. So we are now able to have a kind of blueprint of what kind of molecule we want to design. So we start from this, and then the build phase. So to kind of build the first prototypes, a little bit like it used to be only in software, now in hardware, but also in biotech, we're able to build prototypes for it. Yes, it's always more expensive than to build a pure software prototype, but you can buy DNA on the internet. You can write DNA literally on the internet and actually order your DNA. So those platforms bringing the technology to a cost and accessibility that allows multiple applications and multiple startups to be built is really now reaching all domains and not only software. And then also the test and learn phase with robotics, with artificial intelligence to also analyze data at scale, allow to kind of close this loop and change the initial design. So we can go from months or sometimes years to actually a few weeks or even a few days to really accelerate this cycle and collapse the timeline. So those are the several dimensions that are important to understand why deep tech is not just about technologies, but it's really about a new approach to bring breakthrough innovation to the market.
Ultimately, what we have is a new approach to innovation that allows us to go for fundamental innovation, amplifying, broadening the option space while collapsing the time. So this is really the power of deep tech, but this might sound a little bit of meta frame. So how does it look like? What does it mean concretely for me as a startup? Is there an heuristic? We're talking about here the DoD and DARPA is one of the poster children of innovation and how to drive innovation, and you have the Heisenberg catechism in the DARPA environment. So there is almost a deep tech catechism, if you want, and those 4 moments of truth we have identified is the heuristic for a startup to really approach and process innovation in a way that can lead, assuming that you're going to leverage the convergence of approaches and technology, that you leverage the process, the BTL cycle, and the problem orientation. How do you practically apply? How do startup translate these? And we have identified those 4 moments. And what is important about these 4 moments, you might see looking at these that those 4 moments are almost sequential, and you say this is not really particularly new. Of course, you need to go through this moment, and I go through them. But what is really important is that these 4 moments of truth needs to be looked at from the very beginning throughout. It's not that you do one and you look at the next one, but you need to have the 4 of them in mind from the very beginning. What are those 4 moments? The first one is really about framing the paradigm, is what we call the Copernicus moment, is the question, could reality be different? And I'll give you a couple of examples always to make it more tangible. And in the case, we have here the example of Moderna, but I'm going to give 2 specific energy examples to make it even more tangible for the audience. But Moderna, we know now about mRNA, but when they got started 10 years ago, it was this idea of, okay, could reality be different? Could we, instead of injecting a physical protein in the body, can we instruct the body to produce this protein itself? It's a very Copernican shift in the way you look at it. Could reality be different? Then the next moment is about forging the theory, is about, is there a way to make it possible? And it's just really saying, okay, can we use mRNA to reprogram cells protein production? And then the next step is, okay, good. This theoretically is a way to do it. Can we build it? Can we use it? Can we do it? And mRNA, nobody knew when this got started, but COVID was the perfect example to apply it and accelerate this development. But then is, okay, can have these, and you have probably read a lot of articles about the new mRNA medicine. So can this become the new reality? Can we change the reality? Not only take the first step, but scale is what Steve Banks spoke about before, is how can we scale this stuff? And it's not only the prototype, is really having it to scale. So you will say, okay, Massimo, Moderna is a good example, but it was a particular case. But I think there are a couple of other instances and examples that really make the point. And one of my favorite, Arnaud know about it, I'm very passionate about it. Now, one of these examples is about nuclear fusion. You need to imagine, and this is really a very good way to see how we're expanding the option space and compressing or collapsing the timeline. If you look at nuclear fusion is something that has been thought to always be 10 or 20 years away. And there is a major consortia from major nation states working on it called ITER in France to build something that the budget of several billions, I think 20 or 30 billions to be able to do it, and a timeline of 20, 30 years to do nuclear fusion. Now, here the paradigm is clear. Could reality be different? Shifting from nuclear fission to nuclear fusion, yes, it's clear. But okay, is there a way to make it possible? Yes, we have been able to make it possible. The tokamak is a technology that has been around since 1958. But the question is, can we really build it and have it produce more energy than it consumes? And this startup, there is a startup based out of Boston called the Commonwealth Fusion System that is currently working to do exactly that. And instead of having billions, they have a budget of hundreds of millions and are planning to get there by 2025. And the way they're doing it is leveraging also some pages out of the Lean Startup Handbook from Steve Blank, but basically the way they're doing it, it's through the convergence of approaches. They're bringing together design, science, and engineering. They're really trying to do it at the same time, and they're bringing together the different technologies. So what is allowing them to move to building it today and taking the first step is because they have identified a high temperature superconductor that allows them to double the magnetic field through which they can steer the plasma of the nuclear fusion reactor, and thus having a much higher degree of efficiency and get to an energy generating reactor. So the convergence is allowing this, but the really important part is that they're looking through the DBTL cycle. They're really iterating. Of course, their cycle is not a week. It's in years, but they're starting small, they have a second, they have a third, and they're scaling these, and they're planning and looking to get these on the grid by 2025 and then scale it. And this could really change the game for energy production. On the other side, another example is, and I'm taking an example that technologically are out there, and we don't know if and how they succeed, but I'm really showing them to give you a feeling of how this can translate in reality. And another very good example is on the nuclear fission side of things, which is a startup out of Copenhagen called Seaborg, where they're producing, basically putting small modular reactor on ships that are going to ship around. And the way they have been doing this, and the reason is that they have anticipated the last part about changing the reality. It was not much about a new technology. The technology has been around, they've been refining it. But what they've done from the beginning, they thought, okay, how can I scale this? How can I create a different approach toward the regulatory process to get these solution distributed, because otherwise it would take us decades only to go through these. And they created this shipping paradigm shift because the whole regulatory process is very different than if you build a nuclear plant. So this is to show you two extreme in the space of energy on how to apply this moment of truth. One final thing, very important. We said at the beginning, the importance in a deep tech environment, it's a team sport, and it requires a full ecosystem. And therefore, initiatives like this one are really, really important, bringing together the ecosystem and people come together. And all the different people need to work toward the same goal. They need to align incentives and multiple currencies to exchange. And what I love to say is that deep tech is about making the pie as big as possible, is not about getting the biggest slice of the pie. And this is a very important mind shift that is required from all the actors to be able to really reap the rewards. And a very good example for that is what we're seeing with the fashion industry. You might say, where is the deep tech in the fashion industry? But there is a lot of deep tech going into the material side, changing it. The fashion industry is responsible for a lot of sustainability issues, and they have been struggling to really change the system because you really need the whole ecosystem to work together. Otherwise, you're going to have situation where somebody want to have an exclusivity on material, but then by having the exclusivity, you don't reach the volume that are needed to bring down the price to be able to have these broadly shared and really change the system. So this shift in mentality is particularly important as we go through this. So Arnaud, back to you to go to
because
what is hot in deep tech.
Yeah, I think one might ask in the end, okay, there is a new approach, but is this enough? Is this explaining why deep tech is getting so much traction nowadays? I think the answer to that is that I think we are at a critical point where we face huge challenges, especially related to our environment and climate change, but also health-related challenges. And therefore, there are clear market trends following those challenges. So that's one thing. There is also the fact that we have all those emerging technologies kind of at the same time reaching enough maturity to be able to build new applications, many new applications, to actually solve those challenges. And I think there is also maybe a third aspect, which is the cultural aspect. And Steve Blank mentioned that now entrepreneurship and the possibility to fail and try again is not only in Silicon Valley, but it's all over the world. In Europe and in France, we saw a huge evolution in terms of mindset. So all those ingredients create really a true momentum. Indeed, then we can discuss like where we see the most potential. What are the biggest opportunity spaces, as we mentioned at the beginning, looking at we have about 5,000 deep tech startups applying to the HelloTomorrow challenge every year. So we can share our own vision. Maybe Massimo, you won't agree about where we think lies the highest potential, both for startups, for corporates, for governments, for investors, and probably for society at large as well. In my opinion, let's say the 3-4 most important are in healthcare. There is a lot of startups. Maybe it's at kind of the frontier. Is it deep tech or not? I mean, that's not really the question. But around improving the journey of the people in the healthcare system, but also for more precision medicine, but also of course in biotech, in medical biotech to cure cancer, for example, with CRISPR-edited immune cells. Then maybe the second biggest domain is definitely in energy, and this is also the topic of today. You mentioned Massimo startups in nuclear fusion and fission. So I think that's quite impressive to see startups in those areas. And there are also some that focus on very specific problems that exist in the value chain, like how do we, for example, build batteries and not fall into the problem of rare elements? So how to build either batteries without rare elements, or how to build processes to more efficiently mine those rare elements. There is also many questions about the production of green and cheap hydrogen, and for example, new materials to have a more efficient fuel cells. I won't go into all the details, but definitely the carbon sequestration, storage, and utilization is a big topic. We see many startups, for example, using CO2 to produce plastic or fabrics, so really to upcycle CO2. Maybe I won't go into the details except if there are questions, but the two other really important opportunity spaces are in food and agriculture, and also in sustainable manufacturing and materials. So in the end, we see that it maybe compared to the digital wave, it's really the whole industrial infrastructure that is impacted and shifting through deep tech. And that's the kind of bits and atoms aspect. And I don't know, Massimo, what would be your opinion on where people should invest, where people should look at?
Where to invest, I don't know, but where I think where they should, in terms of impact they can have, is on what we call nature co-design. But before we go there, I think what is really important, and I think we haven't emphasized enough, is that as part of this new approach toward innovation, because of what Arnaud and partially I mentioned, what is interesting is that what startup can do today is incredible to compare to where they were 5 or even 10 or even 5 years ago. So the barriers to innovation are going down, and what can be achieved by startup is going up incredibly. As we go and talk about it. In terms of opportunities, Arnaud, I think that one of the area where we have one of the biggest opportunity of our time is the shift to nature co-design. I think that because of this convergence and coming with bits and atoms and the fact that we have matter as an additional variable for innovation, what is happening is that for the very first time in the history of humankind, we can use nature, or we can work with nature. We can use nature as a manufacturing and engineering platform. And this is a radical shift because this allows us to really rethink the foundation of our economy. As I said, in the first wave, we had a very strong exploitative approach toward things through internal combustion engine and many other things. And now we have the possibility to redo that transformation, but with the generative, and I use the word generative on purpose and not only regenerative, because we have the possibility to build things from the ground up, which has a long list of advantages in doing so, because it allows you to be way more precise, a very different energy balance. And ultimately, and that's why I'm so excited, this is a little bit of the shift that we are seeing. The shift that we're seeing and is about to happen now is comparable to the one that we had as civilization 10,000 years ago, when we shifted from being hunters and gatherers to be farmers. We're now moving from being hunters and gatherers of resources to being farmers at the atomic level. And this is a huge, huge shift that deep tech is gonna enable, but where we're gonna need to really do a lot of work to redo some of the infrastructure. One of the questions was, which are the element of the ecosystem that needs to step up? And I think this is a perfect segue for the last part that we wanted to cover, which is about the investing part. I would say that the whole ecosystem is trying to step up with different degree, but all of this potential that is enabled through deep tech is not going to come to bear its fruits if we are not really unlocking what is needed on the investment side. And what is the irony of this is that we really need to go back to the origins of Silicon Valley. When I don't know if it was Mr. Klein or Mr. Perkins used to go and sit down with their company, and they were doing deep tech in the very beginning. It was about semiconductor, and we need to go there. And it's a little bit of a paradox situation, because yes, there has been an increase. We went from 15 billion to 60 billion last year investing in deep tech, but we think, and we have seen, that this could go up to 220 if this right approach. And today there are probably 20, 30 VCs in the US that are really good at doing this, but the vast majority is still not being able to do it. And we're seeing basically 4 paradoxes that are happening right now. The first one is, I mentioned it, it's ironic that deep tech really plays in the home turf of the origins of venture capital, but venture capital has drifted away to 2 different kind of blueprint, the ICT and the biotech one. The other paradox is that we are the barriers to innovation, as I mentioned, are going down, but the barriers to raise these funds are getting higher and higher. And the other paradox is that, ironically, there is a lot of talk about that these are risky investment, but ultimately it's riskier not to invest in deep tech than invest in deep tech, because you really run the risk of being disruptive fundamentally. And the last paradox is that we have the world is really flushed with cash, but we don't have enough. We have a little bit more, but we don't have enough to do it. So I know you're passionate about the need to change the narrative there.
Yeah, it's true that what we see is that beyond all the technical aspects, all the different investment models that we can put in place, what is really important is to create a common story, a common imaginary around which startups, investors, but also limited partners and institutional investors will align on. And I think we've been part of the kind of old story around deep tech, which is it takes a long time to reach the market. It's very expensive. And to some extent it is true, but with the kind of deep tech approach that we mentioned, design, build, test, learn, cycle, and so on, it is definitely possible to shrink the timeline and to go faster to the market. And the analysis that we did showed also that even though it's more expensive maybe to finance the prototype for a deep tech startup, then along the whole cycle of the startup, in the end, it's going to be cheaper than to finance the growth of Uber or Airbnb, for example, and to compete with because also the technology is a nice barrier to entry that so you don't need to really finance the growth with a lot of money to keep this competitive advantage. We are trying actually to build this new narrative, and we are maybe for some people that might be interested, we are organizing in December, so it's just before the HelloTomorrow Summit, in the event that we will call the Deep Tech Days. One event that we didn't communicate yet about it. It's the Finance the Future. So we want to invite from all over the world, like managing partners, general partners from VC funds, and also institutional investors to really work on those new models that we can share what works, what doesn't work, and best practices, but also reflect on really what is the story around deep tech, and share also success stories, because there are many success stories in deep tech. Even this year, there were many IPOs, SPAC, or huge acquisition or raising or funds raised, but we still don't hear, I think, enough about them. So that's why we wanted to create this event. And I don't know if this has been shared, but you can also read a bit more about those new models and also the whole story in the report we wrote actually with Massimo and of course other people from BCG and HelloTomorrow.
And I would add, please type in your questions. We still have a few minutes and we are keen to answer. But to go back to the initial question about who should set up, I would say second in the ranks are definitely big corporates and corporates. And this goes a little bit to one of the paradoxes that Steve Blank loves to talk about, which is the fact that, yes, a big company is not a big startup, and a startup is not a small company. They have very different raison d'être. But that said, in this environment in which you can really fundamentally innovate and the access to innovation is very different, big corporates need to step up their game and understand and really being willing. It's not only about digitalizing themselves or really embracing the opportunities of digital, but it's really going to the core and questioning some of the fundamentals upon which they're built. So I think that this is an area where there is some room for potential for corporate to grow into the deep tech innovation space.
As you said, of course, all actors need to step up, but we've seen, especially in Europe, because that's where we are really based, we've seen a lot of evolution in the mindsets of researchers and universities. And I think we were maybe, lagging a decade compared to what's happening in the US. But now all the technology transfer offices and all the universities have entrepreneurship lessons, but also are connected to an ecosystem of VCs, industrial partners, accelerators. And in terms of governments, it's, I'm not sure we have time to really dive into this topic. I don't know if there are other questions. Feel free to ask other questions. Otherwise, maybe we can also talk a little bit about what we do at HelloTomorrow to bring this ecosystem together. So we were talking about investors. So we do organize one event to connect startups from our network with investors. And feel free to contact me or Thomas or anybody at HelloTomorrow if you want to know more about it. And there is also this other event I mentioned to connect investors with LPs or institutional investors. For startups, we organize every year the HelloTomorrow Challenge. So that's a big deep tech competition. And it's actually still open for 3 more days. So it's still time to apply if some of you are listening to us. So you can, I don't know if there is the link in the chat. Otherwise, you can check on our website and definitely apply. That's a great way to get international exposure to VC and potential industrial partner or clients. And we have also the equivalent of this program running all year long, which is the Deep Tech Pioneers program. And for corporations, we also have we work with many companies, and that's also how we bring value to the startups, and we basically help them explore what are the potential opportunities in their industry related to deep tech, and also connect them to the right people, universities or startups to co-create some projects or to work with them to solve any business or operational problem they might have. So that's how you can engage with HelloTomorrow if you are a startup, an investor, or or a corporation. And then I think with Massimo and in general, we will keep building the deep tech story. So I don't know. Maybe next year we'll come back with new insights. And anyway, feel free to also follow us on LinkedIn or register to our newsletter. I know that Massimo has also a newsletter that doesn't have deep tech in its name, but it's kind of about deep tech.